During my time, I'd like to emphasize the very broad nature and scope of the war resolution that we're being asked to support. In particular, and this has been mentioned by some of the other congressmen and by the witnesses, there are no geographic limitations. And as I understand it from the information I have, you can make the case that the Islamic State is active, of course, in Iraq and Syria, but also Jordan, Libya, Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and other nations. Under the war resolution that we're being asked to support, in Section 2 it states, the President is authorized to use the armed forces of the United States as the President determines to be necessary and appropriate against ISIL or associated persons or forces as defined in Section 5. You go down to Section 5. The term associated persons or forces means individuals and organizations fighting for, on behalf of, or alongside ISIL, which is, as we know, covering virtually every continent on Earth with the possible exception of Antarctica and many of the countries that are on each of those continents, because the Islamic State has done a fairly good job of recruiting its people from all corners of the globe. In that vein, then, I want to emphasize a couple of questions, but ask you to ask one of them. First, how is America going to pay for it? This is an extraordinary cost, and we've had witnesses where you're sitting now who have already said that the greatest national security threat that the United States of America faces is our deficit and accumulated debt that ultimately has the potential of exposing us to a devastating insolvency and bankruptcy, which would eliminate our ability to have a national defense. Those words, in effect, came from Admiral Mike Mullen when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Second, how does diversion of defense money to this effort to fight the Islamic State undermine our defense capabilities and the rest of the needs for America's national security? The question I want you to answer, though, is if Congress adopts this war resolution or a similar one, how does that action affect the willingness of the rest of the world, and Europe in particular, Germany, France, United Kingdom, Italy, and the like, to shoulder more of the burden, to spend their treasury, to risk the lives of their young men and women, now that they know that the United States of America is once again willing to pay the price for the world's security? So if we pass this war resolution, how does that impact the willingness of other nations that are at risk to spend their money and risk their young men and women? General Keane?
I knew we were going to have this discussion. And I think it's very difficult to put a price tag on security of the American people. We know this is a threat to our interests and national security objectives in the region, and we know it pretends to be a long-term threat to the American people. This ideology is clearly having some impact. I'm not suggesting for a minute that terrorism is going to break out across the United States. I don't wring my hands about things like that. But I do take seriously when a director of the FBI said he's got homegrown terrorism investigations going on in every state in the United States. I'm not suggesting that there's going to be a terrorist act in every state, that every one of those people who he's investigating have the means to do it or the will to do it, but just the fact that it's ongoing itself, I think is alarming in of itself, that how many people have been attracted to this ideology. So secondly, the security of American people are involved here. And should we be prudent about the expenditure of funds to do this? Of course we would be. But one of the things we have to do, to be frank about it, Mr. Congressman, is we have to deal with sequestration. While we're talking about the authorization of military force, the Budget Control Act is decapitating the capabilities of the United States military. And you know that as well as I do when these service chiefs come in front of you and lay out, what their challenges are as they look down the road at the Budget Control Act or sequestration. We're taking the Army down to something that's pre-World War II and the Navy and the Air Force down to something that's 1950s. That doesn't make any sense to anybody. But that's the path that we're on. So I think the Congress can play a significant role here in dealing with sequestration. The Europeans, listen, the Europeans, I don't think they've ever recovered from the fact we bailed them out of from post-World War II. Year after year after year, they have pushed the burden of their security more on us, and this has been generational. Many of these European nations are feckless in the face of real security challenges. You can see it in their budget, and you can see it in their will. And look at how they're dealing with Putin and the redesign of Europe that he's imposing on them, and the feckless response that they were getting from them. It's predictable that we will, by comparison to our European friends, bear a greater burden. I think it goes with the leadership role the United States plays in the world, that the United States believes in stability and security and helping to raise the prosperity level among people in the world, and dealing with the thugs and killers that are out there who would impose our will. And it's not that we have to be the answer to all of it, but where our national interests are involved, that we should be involved. And we shouldn't judge that based on, look around and say, are our European friends going to be with us or not? We should do everything to get them involved with us. But if they choose to be half-hearted about it, if our interests are at stake and the security of American people at stake, then I think we got to be there. And I don't think you put a price tag on it.
Mr. Moulton.